please. The new grandpa.
A call to order the meeting of the University of Wisconsin System Board of Regents. Would the Secretary please read the roll?
Regent Bartel.
Here.
Regent Bradley.
Here.
Regent Burmaster. Regent Connolly Kiesler.
Here.
Regent Crane.
Here.
Regent Keane.
Here.
Regent Davis. Regent Falvo. Regent Loftus. Regent McPike. Regent Pruitt.
Here.
Regent Rosenzweig.
Here.
Regent Shields. Regent Smith.
Here.
Regent Spector. Regent Thomas.
Here.
Regent Walsh.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you very much. The minutes of the October 4th and 5th meeting have been circulated. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Second. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. I would like to start my report by welcoming some special guests. The UW Colleges and Extension operates a fantastic program called the Leadership Academy, which is a professional development program. I met with them on Wednesday because they are using Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to learn about UW system governance and in particular about the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents. So they've been studying us, and they attended committee meetings yesterday, and they are here today to observe us in action. Would the members of the Leadership Academy please stand? We'd like to recognize you. They are some of our valuable assets, faculty and staff from UW Colleges and UW Extension. I'd also like to recognize the Leadership Academy coordinator, Sue Buck. Sue, could you please stand and welcome you? Sue is the Central District Director of Cooperative Extension with her office in Stevens Point. Thanks very much. And I'd like to recognize someone who is not here today. As you know, our colleague and our friend Jesus Salas resigned from the board last month for reasons that he stated in a letter to Governor Doyle. We know that Jesus is a man of strong convictions, and while most of us, I think, feel that he could accomplish more for the Latino community in Wisconsin by being an advocate serving on the board, Jesus apparently felt otherwise. And we respect that decision. We'll have an opportunity to recognize him at a later Regent meeting. Our important work, of course, goes on, and I would like to thank Regent Jeff Bartel for stepping up and agreeing to chair the Physical Planning and Funding Committee. So thanks for your leadership, Jeff. Yesterday, Frida Harris showed us in real numbers how our campuses and extension services will receive significant new public investments over the next 2 years. And then President Riley provided some useful context for this information, reminding us all how this came to be. It started with a plan that focused not on the university, not to grow the university, but to grow the state. The growth agenda took root and grew because of attentive, concerned, engaged citizens across this state. The end result is a state budget that, for the first time in a number of years, not only funds our ongoing operations and current academic programs, but it gives us a genuine opportunity to expand educational access in this state and also scientific discovery through the important research that is done on our campuses. I think that in building the growth agenda for Wisconsin, we raised the aspirations of the people of Wisconsin. We encourage business leaders, elected officials, students, and others to embrace a bold vision for the future, one that is focused on higher paying jobs, faster growing businesses, and finally a richer quality of life in all respects. And with those high expectations come equally high, with those aspirations I should say, come equally high expectations. My message to our stakeholders is that we are going to respond to those expectations with action now that we've been adequately funded, and also accountability. And yesterday you heard Senior Vice President Rebecca Martin unveil the UW Systems plan to participate in the National Voluntary System of Accountability Project. Together with our other communication efforts and our public reports that we have been known for nationally, our Achieving Excellence annual report specifically, this is an important step, I think, toward providing better information to our students and to our broader constituencies. We know that the Sarbanes-Oxley Act provides a framework for transparency and full disclosure in the private sector. And this is exactly, I think, the kind of framework that we need in higher education. One that allows our customers, if you will, and also our investors an objective look at measurable performance on our campuses. I think the students and parents deserve to know which institutions are delivering the best educational results, and legislators, taxpayers, and our private donors alike deserve to know whether we're producing a return on the investment that they expect. As I said, we're going to have to take action, and we're going to be accountable for that action. I think our chancellors, our provosts, and certainly our UW Systems staff understand this. They've not only embraced the voluntary system of accountability, but our own UW experts helped shape that project on a national scale. So we started out conceiving of the growth agenda for Wisconsin, and then we took the step of winning public support for the growth agenda. Our next step in our vision for Wisconsin's prosperous future is the development of our strategic plan, and as you know, we are calling that Advantage Wisconsin. This is about attacking big issues with bold ideas, and for those bold ideas to work, they're going to have to be developed and implemented collaboratively so that everyone understands and values their stake in our public university system. Then we have to communicate that idea clearly and consistently. And to that end, I'd like to just revisit with you some recent meetings that we have had at the Capitol. Last week, I met with the new Senate Majority Leader, Russ Decker, and Kevin and I met with Assembly Speaker Mike Hipsch. We told them what we are going to do with this next step on Advantage Wisconsin, and we asked each of them to commit to us that they would meet with us at least 3 times in the next few months so that we could keep them apprised of what we're doing with our strategic plan and get their candid reactions and advice to what we are doing. Each of them committed to meet at least 3 times over the next few months. And of those 6 meetings, I believe that 5 of them are already on the calendars. I've also met with Senator Mark Miller, the new chair of the Joint Finance Committee, and Senator Jim Sullivan, who is the head of the Senate Audit Committee. It's interesting to meet Senator Sullivan. He just returned from a Midwest meeting of legislators on higher education. And for the first 5 minutes of our meeting, he was telling me how important it is to reinvest in higher education in Wisconsin. And I was convinced. I also met with Senator Julie Lassa, who now is on the Joint Finance Committee. And had meetings with representatives of the offices of Senator Jelk and Senator Weinhaut, also Senator Kapanke, who is very interested in our development of our plans for boosting higher education and what it's able to do for the state of Wisconsin. I also met with representatives of Representative Rhodes' office and Representative Schilling and Bruink and Donna Seidel, who happens to be my representative. We have more legislative meetings coming up soon, including meetings with Representative Richards, Stone, and Hickson. But President Riley and I aren't the only ones who are meeting with legislators. Regents Pruitt, Inspector, and Walsh have been working the Capitol strategically, and there's going to be a Regent presence at the upcoming hearing on the UW systems, or on the Veterans Tuition Remission Program. That hearing is brought by the Senate Higher Education Committee next week. And as you know, Regents Loftus and Walsh and Falbo are our liaisons on veterans tuition remission issues. And while we're on the topic of important events at the Capitol, I would like to congratulate Regent Thomas on her unanimous confirmation by the State Senate. In fact, Colleen, I have to tell you, when I met Senator Sullivan, I said, you know, hello, Senator Sullivan, and my name is Mark Bradley. I'm president of the Board of Regents. And he said, do you know that new regent who just got confirmed? I said, yes, and I said, I'd send his regards to you. So that concludes my remarks, and I now would like to turn it over to System President Kevin Riley.
Thank you, President Bradley, and good morning, everybody. Today, I want to talk a little bit with you about the Wisconsin Covenant. Many of you know, I think, I joined Governor Doyle last week in Milwaukee for a very, very important announcement about the Covenant, that the Great Lakes Higher Education Guarantee Corporation would donate $40 million to the new Wisconsin Covenant Foundation. As everybody in this room, I think, knows well, the Covenant is devoted to ensuring that families and students understand how important it is that students go on to a post-secondary education, and that we will work with the families and students to make that dream affordable. I wanted to give an opportunity today to the president of the Great Lakes Corporation to tell you how interested they have been in the Covenant, how the new foundation that was created last week will support it. And I'm very pleased that CEO and President of Great Lakes, Richard George, is with us today. A former partner with Foley and Lardner and an Air Force officer, Mr. George has been a member of the Board of Directors of the Great Lakes Higher Education Corporation since 1984. He was elected Chairman and Chief Executive Officer in September 1989. So thanks, Dick, for joining us today, and thank you for making the dreams of many, many future UW-Wisconsin students possible. Podium is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Appreciate that introduction. Appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you this morning. I have some old friends here at the table who have probably been wondering what I've been doing for the last 20 years. Well, Jeff, David, I've been hiding out by the airport gathering money to do good works. But in any event, you know, Great Lakes is one of the organizations that many people are not particularly familiar with. The Great Lakes affiliated group of companies is actually one of the largest integrated service providers in the student loan space. We work with schools, lenders, borrowers, parents all over the country. Our operating companies number some 950 employees around the country. Most of them here in Wisconsin. We're headquartered here in Madison, have operating locations in Boscobel and Eau Claire, and operating centers throughout the upper Midwest and nationally. Our operating companies primarily provide guarantees on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education, and origination and servicing of student loans on behalf of lenders all over the country. Our 950-some employees are responsible for about $250 million in annual revenues, and it's those operations from which we derive our nonprofit net margin, which is dedicated as a public charity, which is what our affiliated group is, to facilitation of post-secondary access. That is our mission. It is our soul. It's what we do. We have a mandate under the Higher Education Act from the U.S. Congress to support outreach and access towards that facilitation of post-secondary access. We looked at the covenant in its early infancy as being a very, very integral part of what it is we're trying to do in support of that charitable mission of facilitating post-secondary education. We are involved throughout the state in a number of community-based and faith-based organizations where one-on-one we're trying to touch students and families and let them know that post-secondary education is a reality. If they're academically prepared, if they're committed, that there will be financial resources available to support the realization of their dreams of participation in post-secondary education. We work every day with role models, community organizations, faith-based organizations towards delivering that message. And when we looked at the covenant, we saw the possibility that the covenant could support those day-to-day activities that we're already involved in and deliver an overarching message to all Wisconsin students that this opportunity, post-secondary education, changing their lives, is something that if they aspire to, the full resources of the state are going to be brought together to ensure that those dreams will be fulfilled. So we wanted to do two things in our support for the covenant. One, we wanted to give increased visibility to that message that post-secondary education, particularly for lower income and first generation students and families, is a very, very real possibility backed by all of our collective resources. The second thing we wanted to do is provide some significant economic substance to that message so that students and families throughout the state would know that the business community, philanthropies, the educational networks in this state, our public officials, our legislature, and our governor are all committed to that same end. And that this is not just a promise of expectations for our students and expectations for the future of the Wisconsin economy, but this is going to be backed with real economic substance, with a real effort to collect additional monies so that there is, for every student that fulfills the covenant and pursues the dream, a reality at the end of that process. That's the business we're in. We are very, very pleased to be working with all of you in support of the covenant. I think this is going to be a tremendous opportunity for our students and families, and most importantly, when we look at the demographic of those future post-secondary participants, it's critically important for the future economy of Wisconsin. I want to thank two groups who actually make our commitment to the covenant possible. First, I want to thank all of the some 950 employees at Great Lakes who know that every day it's their efficiency and their commitment to doing what's right on behalf of our borrowers, families, and schools that makes our net margin possible and in turn produces the wherewithal to support the covenant. My Director of Policy and Regulatory Compliance, Jackie Fairburn, is here representing those 950 employees. Jackie, please stand up and say hello to everyone. And the second group that needs to be thanked is really who you all represent. If it weren't for all of the schools in Wisconsin who choose to work with Great Lakes, obviously our market share and our ability to produce that net margin and the wherewithal to support the covenant would not exist. So a great deal of gratitude on behalf of our employees, myself, to all of you here who represent the educational system, particularly the UW system, who almost exclusively chooses the higher quality of service that Great Lakes offers. This is a competitive business, and we really do appreciate yours. So thanks so much for supporting us. We look forward to working with you in support of our students and families.
Thank you, President George, and we look forward to a long, productive covenant partnership with you and Great Lakes. Thanks. Complementary to the covenant's key themes that college is possible and preparation is essential is our other new initiative, Know How to Go Wisconsin, and I wanted to tell you where we are with that. You've received an invitation to the public launch of this initiative, which is scheduled for Friday, November 16th, coming up shortly. A copy of that invitation is in your packet this morning, along with a brief summary of the program. On November 16th, then, we will announce with our Wisconsin partners that the Know How to Go Wisconsin website is live. And we'll give you a look at that website at your meeting in December and tell you about further efforts to come. Don Mash has been coordinating this initiative with a steering group comprised of staff from the UW system, from the technical college system, from the private colleges, the PK-12 sector, and the Wisconsin Covenant Office. And I think I saw the director of the Covenant Office, Jill Hassenfeld, slip in earlier. Jill, are you back there? There's Jill. Welcome. Thank you for your work on the Covenant. Thanks. So the National Know How to Go campaign is aimed at middle school students, particularly low-income, first-generation college-going students, precisely that wider and deeper cut of the population we've been talking about attracting to the university. This campaign, I'll remind you, is jointly sponsored by the American Council on Education, the Lumina Foundation, and the Ad Council in New York. We have signed on now as a state partner and customized the Know How to Go website into a Know How to Go Wisconsin website as the initial phase of our effort, which we hope will eventually include TV and radio spots. Now, on to a few other happenings around the system. We have a new partnership between two of our own campuses, UW Oshkosh and UW Green Bay. These two campuses have come together to form the University of Wisconsin Northeast Wisconsin Learning Center. The new center offers classes and advising services for working adults in the Fox Cities area through the new Bachelor of Applied Studies programs at Green Bay and at Oshkosh. These BAS programs are the first of their kind in the UW system. I'm sure you remember when you approved them. And they're part of our multi-pronged strategy to increase the number of individuals holding a baccalaureate degree in the state. So congratulations to Chancellor Shepard and Chancellor Wells on the establishment of this new, that is, Northeast Wisconsin Learning Center. More than 400 people representing 82 institutions of higher learning attended the annual National Outreach Scholarship Conference in Madison last month. Hosted and co-sponsored by UW Extension and UW Colleges, this national conference brings together experts from a wide variety of academic disciplines who share an interest in university community engagement, public service, action research, and educational outreach. Highlight of the conference, I think, was the presentation for the first time of 5 regional W.K. Kellogg Foundation awards to institutions for excellence in outreach and engagement. And one of these 5 institutions will now be selected, really has been selected, and it will be announced next week in New York City at the annual meeting of the National Association of State Universities and Land-Grant Colleges, that one of those is the first winner of the Peter McGraw Engagement Award. Some of the regents on the board were here when Peter McGraw, who was then the president of that nostalgic organization, came and spoke to us. He has since retired, and this award is named in his honor. And I was very privileged to be one of 5 college and university presidents on a panel to select the institution that will win the final award, which I'm sworn to secrecy not to tell you because it will be announced in New York this coming week. So University of Wisconsin Extension was one of the founding partners in this conference, this National Outreach Scholarship Conference with Penn State and with the University of Georgia. They've now rounded up several other prominent universities to partner with them on it. David and his colleagues have the North Carolina State University of Alabama and Michigan State University are now co-sponsors as well. So congratulations to Chancellor Wilson and his colleagues for another successful conference. For a more local angle on community engagement, we'll turn to Regent Bradley's backyard, where the UW Extension office in Marathon County and the UW Marathon County campus co-hosted the first, quote, Great Northwood Service Learning Conference, unquote, in Wausau last month. I think this is an example of on-the-ground collaboration between UW colleges and UW Extension, bringing together faculty and staff from both of the institutions, represented by our EALP Academy folks over there, to pool their experience with service learning programs, other community-based learning projects. About 60 participants spent a day getting to know their service learning-minded colleagues and plotting future collaborations. So we know that only good things can come out of that plotting. The UW Superior mock trial team has been invited to the prestigious Crimson Classic Mock Trial Invitational Tournament at Harvard University. This tournament is an exclusive invitation-only competition for the best 32 mock trial teams from around the country. Our students will be competing this weekend against teams from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cal Berkeley, and others. Just being invited to this tournament is an impressive accomplishment for Chancellor Erlenbach and his UW Superior colleagues, but I fully expect our Yellow Jackets to give the Crimson, the Bulldogs, and the other teams a good run for their money, and maybe even a stinging rebuke or two in the process. So best of luck to your team, and I'm sure they'll make us all proud. And I was thinking, given the number of lawyers on this board, this group could be fertile ground for future regents. So who knows? Speaking of stinging rebukes. Provost and Vice Chancellor Carol Sue Butts has made her campus, UW-Platteville, and all of us proud as the winner of the 2007 Outstanding Achievement Award presented by the Wisconsin Women in Higher Education Leadership. She accepted the award last month at the organization's state conference in Neenah. Congratulations to Carol Sue. UW-Eau Claire is receiving national acclaim as one of the top producers of Fulbright Fellows in the nation. The Fulbright program funds outstanding students to volunteer and research abroad, equipping them to become future leaders in a globally integrated environment. This is an extremely competitive and lengthy process, as I think many of you know, for each of the applicants. The fact that 3 UW-Eau Claire students were awarded these venerable fellowships this year speaks volumes about the quality of the staff and faculty we have working with our students and the students' own accomplishments. So congratulations to Chancellor Levin Stankiewicz and to the students, faculty, and staff at UW-Eau Claire. UW Parkside Center for Community Partnerships received a 3-year, $1.5 million grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to aid local organizations in improving their ability to provide social services. The grant funds the Kenosha Racine Compassion Capital Fund project. Through this project, Parkside will help nonprofits operating on a limited financial budget to implement long-term educational changes to better serve their clients. I know there'll be lots of people in southeastern Wisconsin who benefit from the work of that project. So congratulations to Chancellor Keating and his colleagues at UW Parkside. Just last week, 2 promising young faculty members at UW-Madison received Presidential Early Career Awards for scientists and engineers at a White House ceremony in Washington. This prestigious award recognizes junior researchers who have demonstrated exceptional potential and leadership. Anna Scope, Assistant Professor of Genetics and Medical Genetics in Madison's College of Agricultural and Life Sciences and School of Medicine and Public Health, was nominated by the National Science Foundation for innovative research into the molecular mechanisms involved in cell division. Sterling Johnson, an Associate Professor of Medicine at the School of Medicine and Public Health, and the William S. Middleton VA Hospital, was nominated by the Department of Veterans Affairs in recognition of his work on neural disorders related to aging and brain damage. So lest you think that these two researchers spend all of their time in the lab, it's worth noting, I think, that Dr. Scope also works as a mentor and advocate for the advancement of Native Americans in science. So congratulations to John Wiley and Pat Farrell and their colleagues on those very prestigious awards. Now on to two other items on our agenda. First up, it's my pleasure to introduce UW-Stevens Point Chancellor Linda Bunnell. Chancellor Bunnell chairs the Committee to Review Allocable Fees and will now provide a brief description of the committee and update us on its activities. You'll recall that this committee was formed by President Bradley back in August with a charge to look at three main issues. One, the criteria for the recognition of student organizations. Two, issues regarding the allocation of on-campus space for recognized organizations. And three, whether allocable segregated fees should be used to support the salaries of student organization employees. So I'll ask Linda to provide us with a brief report on the group's work thus far. Chancellor.
Thank you so much, President Riley, and thank you, President Regent Bradley, for appointing such an outstanding committee. I want to tell you that Lori Berquam, Dean at UW-Madison, Patricia Brady, our General Counsel, Anthony DeWeese, who represented the UW colleges as a student, Ray French, head of student government at Eau Claire, right? And Alex Gallagher, who's very involved in student affairs in student life, student government at Madison. Justin Gladowski, the president of UW-Stevens Point Student Government Association, Regent Shields. And Andy Saul, he's behind me from Eau Claire, and Michael Benny, who's the vice chancellor for student affairs at Platteville. We really had a great group. We've now met 3 times. I think our longest meeting was a 6-hour meeting, which was Wednesday evening. We have hammered out a draft that I believe addresses Regent Bradley's charge. It's now being circulated to the campuses for comment and review. We'll meet again on the 27th of November, and we will then forward a report to President Riley that includes our recommendations as well as the comments that have come back from the campuses. I'd really like to ask each of my colleague chancellors to be very alert to the fact that this report is coming to the campus. It's a very short turnaround time. We realize that, but we did want to get this report to you by December. Regent Bradley, I thank you for extending the deadline by a month. It really helped us do the kind of job that I believe the Regents wanted us to. I also want to recognize the staff, Tom Stafford, Larry Rubin, and Doug Hendricks, for being so supportive and preparing lots of materials for us. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I think the proof of the pudding will be in what I think is a really a report that represents listening and compromise, but retains the general direction that we have to adhere to our state policies that are imposed upon not only our Student Government Association, but also on the UW system itself with regard to hiring students, with regard to hiring, and with regard to renting space. Questions?
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I wanted to thank Chancellor Bunnell for taking on this job. This is highly complex, highly charged, difficult, and important issue to the students and to us. And I want to acknowledge that and acknowledge Linda's hard work and many hours of listening and chairing meetings on this topic. So we do appreciate it. Next, I'll ask our Executive Senior Vice President, Don Match, to give us an update on our strategic planning process, Advantage Wisconsin. If you've looked at our UW system website recently, you may have noticed one small but significant change. We previously devoted a parcel of real estate on that website to the growth agenda, the front page of it. Today, that space also includes a direct link to our Advantage Wisconsin web space, indicating not only the importance we're giving to this process, but also our intent to use the web as a means of informing and engaging the public in a two-way dialogue about our public university. We're also sending a survey on the UW to 3 statewide business groups as part of this exercise, and UW Extension is hosting a statewide listening session to gather grassroots input on the plan. The Advantage Wisconsin think tanks are meeting, as you know. I think just about all of them have met, some of them more than once, and the listening process is well underway. New ideas are already beginning to bubble up. And to tell us more about the bubbling process, I've asked the always effervescent Executive Senior Vice President Don Mash to join us. I will come back after Don's remarks for an open discussion with board members and others on how Advantage Wisconsin is shaping up, so we can have some dialogue back and forth about what you're thinking about. But with that, Executive Senior Vice President Mash.
Thank you, President Riley. I can't wait to call my kids and tell them how I was introduced and watch their reaction. We're going to use the website this morning, the actual website, to refer you to some of the points that I want to make about the activity. Jennifer Moore, who is a web writer and editor on her technical staff, is going to assist me. We appreciate that. One of the things that I want to say is that what we're looking at in this activity is a continuation of the growth agenda and the momentum that we generated and have generated with the growth agenda. And the tricky part of what we're doing is we're attempting to create a framework at the UW system level, because all of our campuses have strategic plans that are very operational, of course. I was struck yesterday in the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee meeting, one of the regents, in listening to a summary of one of the think tank team activities, pointed out what he felt was the importance of the campuses within the framework that's eventually developed being able to do the things it feels it can do best and that fit best in its circumstances. And that's exactly the balance we're trying to achieve here. And the other thing that I would say is that this activity, the strategic framework itself at the moment, is really a very strong communication vehicle. You heard Region President Bradley talk about some of what he and President Riley have done in meeting with some of our legislators, for example. And that strategic framework page is a way to focus where we are now and what we're hoping to do to impact in a positive way the state's future. Now, the think tank activity and the activity that's unfolding is to create an enriched strategic framework with some big ideas under each of the 7 core strategies. What you're looking at now is the homepage of our website. And by the way, if you go to the to Wisconsin EDU, you'll find a link that'll take you directly to the Advantage Wisconsin website, which we're going to be using as a two-way communication vehicle and a way to continue to report the importance of our work. What you see demonstrated on the homepage is the strategic framework, preparing students, the enabling strategies related to resources, operational excellence, and collaborations, and then, of course, the key areas of more graduates, higher paying jobs, and stronger communities. Each of those has a think tank team working to enrich the general idea behind each of those. And as you know, there is material raising questions for the think tank teams to consider as they look at each one of the core strategies, and you would be able to get to more detail by going to some of the links on the website. Jennifer, just flash the strategic framework for a second, if you would, please, the full page display. And Regents, you have this material in your packets as well, a couple of these pages, including the think tank teams, the location and times of their meetings, the participants, and some other information. So the core strategies represented by the text related to each of the 7 areas we're looking at. I'd like to take you for a moment through the process and timeline display that is situated on our website. You'll recall that I showed you a draft of this at the River Falls meeting. We listened to some comments. We've tried to rearrange it a little bit and try to capture on one slide the process. Now, what I would say is this, that if you look at that slide, and I'm going to talk about a couple of key pieces of it in a minute, what you don't see, of course, is that the growth agenda and some of our activity, even before the growth agenda, is at the core of what we're doing now. And if the chancellors and our president's staff at UW Assistant can go back to late April, when we did a retreat to begin to talk about this effort. And then if you as Regents think about the presentation that Dennis Jones made to you in Milwaukee at the June meeting, and a lot of other activity, takes us to the point where we have 7 cross-campus internal and external think tank teams looking at each of the core strategies. Now, one of the things that I would note is that we've had a lot of different comments as we've talked about this process, about different ways to do different things and a lot of suggestions. But interestingly enough, the core strategies, the 7 core strategies that we're now looking at more closely, there was fairly early agreement on those. And they came in large part out of the Chancellor's 2-day retreat in late April and the follow-up conversations we have had with you. In addition to the cross-campus think tanks, there's other activity happening on our campuses. There are some individual groups looking at some of these issues. There are some system-wide activities that are also looking at the core strategies. The student affairs officers from around the system, for example, have decided there'll be a think tank and they'll be working at that. We're looking at ways to have our students engaged on the campuses as well in these conversations. I would just point out that the tuition and financial aid and the matter of the UW College's role and mission, those 2 items are underway. They are not a part of one of the think tanks. They have separate groups working at them. We have them up there simply to show you that we haven't lost track of those, and there will be conversation coming to you about those as well. But when I mentioned earlier the matter of a communications document, the chancellors, the communication that President Riley has on a regular basis, the regents, and others, what we're trying to encourage is a focus of a conversation around the strategic framework. President Riley's already mentioned some good examples of some of the public input that we're also trying to generate as a part of this process. And in that first yellow block, you'll notice that leadership team retreats, December 18, January 18. The chancellors and systems cabinet folks are going to come together and look at what's come out of the think tank teams and these other engagements of conversation about the core strategy and attempt to make some sense of them, coordinate them, so that eventually when we bring the enriched framework to you at your February meeting for discussion, we will have tried to bring together in a very, very clear manner what we have as a framework, a collective framework for the UW system to guide the activities of the system and our campuses thereafter. Mentioning over to the right the ongoing activities beyond the February meeting with you. Budget development for the next biennium, for example, will be a part of it. A lot of the things that the campuses will begin to look at, some external partnerships that are forged, as well as continuing public engagement. The box at the bottom right, level 2, as you heard in Regent Bradley's remarks, that's already underway. And it isn't a matter of doing the strategic framework and then moving on to level 2. They overlap, and we're trying to extend the conversation as broadly as we can about the state's future and our role in that. So I think the only other thing that I would mention that isn't displayed there, next week, since most of the think tanks have already met at least once, one of them's met twice at this point, all of the resource people from each of the think tank teams, and these are UW system staff, are coming together, and we're going to try to talk a little bit about what we're hearing from each of the think tank teams and begin to coordinate a bit and blend some of the ideas as we look ahead to some of the work that's represented up there. Regent Bartell pointed out, or at least asked the question at the River Falls meeting, after observing, you're going to have a lot of ideas and a lot of things, and this has to be coordinated and focused, and of course it does. And we're ever mindful of that, and we'll continue working at that. So with that, that's where we are now. Jennifer, I guess what I'd like you to do, and you use your own judgment on this, go back to the homepage of the website and just take the group through a little bit of the activity that's represented in the bar across the top there that they haven't seen yet. The why now piece, hold on to that if you would. We've tried to take some time to state as clearly as we can the sense of urgency we think there is about looking at the state's future and getting at some of the critical things that need to be done now, not only in terms of what we would be doing, but also what the state needs to be doing as it looks forward. All you have to do is think about Dennis Jones's presentation in June to have recalling some of that sense of urgency. So there's a statement there that talks about why now, and what some of the compelling reasons are, and what some of the things are that suggest we do need to begin to focus our attention now. But go ahead and continue, Jennifer, if you would. As you can see, each of the think tank teams around each of the core strategies has a link that gets you into more of the discussion that they're focused upon at their meetings. The other thing that I would want to mention is that we've posted a number of reports and resource material from the past, like the Charting a New Course, the effort that the Regents did a couple of years ago as reference material on the website as well. So we hope that'll be an active vehicle, and we hope that you'll be able to go to it, track progress, and we'll be referring people in the public to it. We also have a feedback section where one could offer some ideas and some thoughts to us and get those into the hopper as well. Okay?
Good. Well, thank you, John, and let me thank you for all your hard work. This is, as you all, I think, recognize, a very big enterprise to try to move forward, pull together, and Don and folks who work with them on this, I think, have done a terrific job. Before I open it up for your reactions and advice, I want to say I know, and Don alluded to this, Business, Finance, and Audit had a discussion about the work of two of the think tanks. The Education Committee had a discussion about the work of the Prepare Students think tank, and I was privileged to sit in on that one. And I was saying to Regent Davis last evening, I thought it was just a wonderful discussion, and on that one, I could feel around the table and in the room that pent-up desire to talk about some of the academic issues that the board often doesn't get enough time to talk about and spend time on. And from what I've heard from folks who've been involved in the think tank meetings, both our own folks and some of the external folks, they've just been very, very powerful and enlivening discussions, and I think we'll turn up with, at the end of their process, some very interesting ideas for how we can drive each of those core strategies into the future. We will take those ideas, analyze them, talk some more with folks, and I'll come back to you in February with my recommendations for some things based on the work of those think tanks that I think we need to do differently, we need to do more of, we need to do less of maybe in some instances. But with that, I don't want to steal the thunder from Regent Davis or Regent Smith in their reports from their committees, but I thought it would be nice to have an opportunity for other members of those committees who are in those discussions and or other members of the board who are interested in the think tank work, any other aspects of this strategic plan, to have a conversation. So the floor is open for suggestions, discussions, questions. Regent Bartel.
I think that I think it's a terrific initiative, and I think one of the best parts of it is bringing in the external constituents into the planning process. And I was wondering, on the basis of the first set of meetings of the think tanks, are you getting a lot of participation? Are the external constituents showing up? Are they participating? Are they involved in creative thinking? I mean, what is the experience of the first round?
Well, what I'm getting from the folks who are facilitating those sessions is that, yes, the external representatives are participating. We've made it easier for them to do so by making it possible to participate by telephone if they choose to, a teleconference. But yes, the participation and the attendance at this has been very, very good. And the external folks bring a very nice perspective to the cross-campus discussions on some of these issues. I think that people are just generally encouraged with the flow of ideas and thoughts and observations about things that we could do differently that would make a difference. I think the challenge really is to sort through those and focus the very best ideas as our guide.
And on November 27th, the enterprise that Extension is helping us with involves our having local conversations in all 72 counties facilitated by our local Extension faculty who do this for a living pretty much in those counties about this framework. And I'll have a chance to talk directly via video with each of the counties that's in on that, and then they'll go off for a couple hours and have the local conversations, and then we'll come back at the end for some back and forth electronically, and then we'll bring all of that into the process at that point as well. In Rosenzweig.
Thank you. I too was taken with how helpful it was to have a presentation in business and finance, particularly on the operational excellence, because it's, of course, a conversation we've had in the past in that committee. And I was hoping, and I assume that given the fact that it is beneficial, that would be a routine way in which the Regents would be kept current as to the conversation going on, and that we would be able then to give some feedback, which could be incorporated in that initial document, so that at the end of the day we don't find ourselves with a document in front of us that is just from, that we adopt willy-nilly without having our say along the way. So I would encourage it and continue that operation, and also to incorporate it.
And that's our intention.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Regent Walsh.
What kind of engagement have you experienced with regards to the legislature or their staffs? Have they been involved?
Well, I can address that a bit, and I think Regent Bradley can too. In the meetings we've been having and I've been having, I bring in a copy of the framework and say, this is what we're working on. And I point out to them that it's not an inside baseball framework. It's not us just looking at our internal operations. It's an outside-in kind of framework where we really are looking to see what we need to do for the state. Regent Bradley mentioned that the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the Assembly have now agreed to meet with us 3 times so we can bring to them some of what the think tanks are working on and get their reaction, incorporate that into the process along the way as well at those 3 points. You know, what I've said to the legislators I've met with is, look, when we get done with this and the regents decide what it is they want to take out of this, I'd like to have you on a platform with me and Mark saying, we back this. We think this is what the university needs to do for the future of the state of Wisconsin. And nobody, when I've said that, has said, no, that's a bad idea. They've all said, well, that sounds reasonable. We'll work with you on that.
But have they shown an interest in being involved in the process, assigning some of their staff?
Well, we haven't really asked them to do that. I guess we thought these meetings with leadership, these 3 meetings with leadership, would be adequate. We'd certainly be open to that if their staff wanted to come. We haven't requested that of them, and they have not suggested.
David, we just approved going forward. I mean, we announced this voluntary accountability system yesterday, which dovetails with our Advantage Wisconsin effort. And I think it was 6 meetings that I had yesterday. Everybody showed an awareness of what we were doing. Kevin had sent electronically to all legislative offices a description of what we were doing. They all had read that. They knew what I was talking about. And I got the impression that their attitude was, we're eager to see what you come up with, and we want to react to that, rather than we want to sit at the table with you and design this. But I know, but did you find the same thing?
That's the same general attitude. And I think we kind of found that in the charting the course exercise as well. That was kind of their attitude.
For that.
Yeah. They came to a meeting, and as you've told the story, when we said, well, what do you want us to do? They said, well, you're in the business. You tell us what you think you ought to do and let us react to it. And that's kind of the same message I think we're getting now. Regent Davis.
2 questions. Kind of one related to the one that you just responded to. The 3 meetings that you're going to have that the legislative leadership has agreed to have with you, are any of those, do you think, going to happen sometime between the leadership, what did you call them, the leadership retreats and the regent meeting on February 8th?
Yes.
They are.
Well, I know one is scheduled for late in December, and we have one of the leadership retreats earlier in December, so they'll be kind of mixed in.
Yeah, because I just think some kind of, like you indicated yesterday, progress opportunity conversation,
right,
especially since the budget should follow whatever we're recommending. It's appropriate, so I'm glad to hear that. Second question has to do with marketing of the website and its availability to keep up with what's going on in the development of the strategic framework, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how that is currently being marketed. It's one thing to send it out to everybody, blah, 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 but how are we marketing? And then related to that, how are we tracking the traffic to the website? Are we tracking the traffic to the website so that in the end we can evaluate whether or not, that's one, that would be one indication of engagement, if you will, along the way.
Good question. Don, do you?
Well, you raise a good question in terms of a plan to distribute it widely. I don't know that we have a plan necessarily. We have all of the think tank teams, and there are a number of people involved utilizing it. We have the campuses utilizing it, and we have the external groups that we will be consulting with, being made aware of it. Technically, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know how we track the number of hits on it, and that's what you're asking, right?
Well, not just, for the purpose of evaluating who's actually paying attention.
Oh, yes. Okay.
You know what I mean? So it's
Jennifer,
At the bottom of the feedback page there, where we're asking for feedback, inviting feedback, we are trying to determine who we're getting the feedback from by category.
Right.
In that sense.
Okay.
Now, how much of that we can generate is not clear at this point, but we'd like to try to to give it broad
I
exposure.
think you might want to know. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, yes, sure.
Good point. Regent Loftus.
Well, two questions. In the Education Committee, we had a document that listed quite an extensive list of questions about preparing students. There's certainly a large body of research literature on every one of those issues that was brought here, and there is no lack of information out there. Do you anticipate doing the old-fashioned survey of the literature that would on these things? I mean, or is it, or not?
Well, our resource people for each of the think tanks, including that one, preparing students, put together some relevant background material for the think tanks that pretty much captures the literature. And in our statement, we've created a core strategy. We've created what we think is an end goal of the type of product we're trying to produce. The key now is to try to determine, in addition to what we're already doing, and by the way, we're doing an excellent job, by all accounts, when we look at the UW system generally. What we're trying to do is figure out how we can do a better job, how we can leverage our work, maybe extend it further in a very cost-efficient manner, and particularly how we can connect our graduates to the life and economy of the state to the extent possible.
So you are doing a survey of the literature?
The resource folks who prepared resource material for this think tank team summarized with some key documents for the think tank team the background, the material that we thought would be necessary.
I guess I'd also say part of the reason that the people who are on the specific think tanks are on those think tanks is because they bring expertise to them. These are people in the system who work in the areas related to the think tank, so they're familiar with the relevant literature by and large.
The other question is well, the preface is if you live here, it's obvious what the drivers are. We have just, for example, WARF at $2 billion now out there very aggressively leading in certain areas that the university will follow. We have the UW Foundation at $2 billion now. There are trends that are going on that just seem unstoppable, and the question is how do you get ahead of, recognize those trends, and then how do you put them in place? Professor Whitty mentioned one yesterday at one end of the spectrum, the competition for students that's going on in the state. The other end of the spectrum, and maybe Provost Farrell can help me with this, the campus here recently got, I forget the grant size, but Madison is now a major research center for Antarctica. Somewhere around this town there are 100 people studying Antarctica that weren't here 2 years ago. I mean, this is a driver here. This means all kinds of things to this university. And so how do you recognize those type of trends and put them into the thinking?
Well, we'll see what the think tank teams have to say about that. The Madison campus in particular, of course, and the whole matter of external grants and the research that's being done, hopefully now with WISES as a counterpart to WARF, but focused on our comprehensives, we're starting to see some results there as well. I know that our resource group is looking at external support and external grants as one way of diversifying and increasing our support. And you can't deal with the sort of issue that you're raising, Regent Loftus, without also relating it to the core strategy that talks about jobs and job creation. I mean, there are any number of those where there's some synergy that we hope we're going to be able to put together some connections in the final product.
The two think tanks that are most relevant, I think, Tom, the one on resources, where what they're looking at is how to balance, diversify, and grow our financial resources and facilities while developing our human talent. And on the high-paying jobs one that Don just mentioned, that one, the direction there is how do we increase the creation of high-paying jobs by expanding our research enterprise while linking our programs to entrepreneurship and business development. I think you put your finger on one of the big issues that we have to grapple with in both those areas going forward. As more and more of our revenue, especially at Madison, but across the system, comes from non-state sources, how does that shape the university? How do we direct the flow of that money in a way that's most productive? How does the employment relationships, the research projects that money drives versus positions or projects that might be funded with public money, how does that affect the work we do? There's a whole myriad of questions there that really go to the, and I hate to use this term, but again, it's what's happened, the quasi-privatization of our enterprise. And I think we're all very aware of that across the think tanks, and in a couple of them, I think they really are grappling very directly with those questions. Any other questions or advice? Well, thank you. We'll keep coming back each month, as Regent Rosenzweig was suggesting, in the committees and at the general board meeting. Thanks, Don, to give you some sense of where we are and get your input. Again, you're all invited to any of the think tank meetings that you want to come to. We'd be happy to have your participation, and I want to thank again the efforts of everybody who's helping to move this big effort forward. In conclusion, for my remarks this morning, the Advantage Wisconsin process really is about gathering ideas and input, but I think a lot of Wisconsin residents at this time of the year are thinking about gathering leaves that fall from the trees in their yards. So I thought I'd read to you what the poet Robert Frost says about that often frustrating endeavor. Spades take up leaves no better than spoons, and bags of leaves are light as balloons. I make a great noise of rustling all day, like rabbit and deer running away. But the mountains I raise elude my embrace, flowing over my arms and into my face. I may load and unload again and again, till I fill the whole shed, and what have I then? Next to nothing for weight, and since they grew duller from contact with earth, next to nothing for color. Next to nothing for use, but a crop is a crop, and who's to say where the harvest shall stop? So let's hope our Advantage Wisconsin effort to gather new ideas is more productive than Frost's leaf-raking efforts. We want them to be more colorful, weighty, and useful as we go through this process. And that's not to say we won't be equally challenged to get our arms around them when we're done piling them all up. I think we will. But we look forward to that challenge. I want to wish everybody a happy leaf-raking season and a happy Thanksgiving, since we won't be meeting before the holiday. And President Bradley, that concludes my remarks. Back to you.
Thank you, President Riley. Wednesday, when I was describing the UW system and governance and how there are paths to leadership, somebody in the Leadership Academy asked me, well, how do you get to be president of the UW system? And I said, well, to start with, you should be able to recite poetry from memory. We'll now turn to the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee, and I call upon Chairman Brent Smith.
Thank you, President Bradley. One of our first items of business was to consider accepting 8 bequests to the with a total of almost $4.5 million. Incredibly, we decided to accept those bequests, and that'll be a part of the good work again group, and that will be a resolution at the end of my report. The think tanks that we just recently talked about, we heard from Vice Chancellor Bazell regarding the Operational Excellence Working Group. We heard from Frida Harris regarding the resource group. Rather than try to summarize those because they were extensive discussions, I think I'd ask you to look at our minutes from that meeting, which I think reflect the many topics that were presented by Darrell and Frida on those subjects. As far as quarterly gifts, grants, and contracts, Debbie Durkin presented a report that showed total awards of $355.4 million for the quarter ending September 30th, 2007. This does represent a decrease of $44.2 million from the prior year. Federal awards were down 48.6, while non-federal were down 4.4 million. Decreases of 19.8 million in the research area and 19.8 million in federal student aid were the major contributors to the overall decrease. The decrease in research awards results primarily from two large NSF grants received by UW-Madison last year, but not this year. The decrease in federal financial aid awards is considered a timing issue that should resolve next quarter. And you have those materials that were sent to you on that issue. On another issue that you was a separate attachment on quarterly expenditures, budget to actual. This is something we have not done, I'm talking with Debbie, much of in the recent history. It used to be done, and I think we're going to go back to doing it to try to have a quarterly report of a budget to actual. And Debbie presented a schedule of UW system expenditures through the first quarter of the current fiscal year. That information included current and prior year expenditures by institution for GPR and fee funds. Debbie noted that both years are shown against 2007 final budget, since we do not yet have the final budget allocations by institution for fiscal year 2008. Debbie Durkin provided an update on the work of the Tuition and Financial Aid Working Group that we made reference to earlier. The working group focused recently on the board's current statutory authority to set tuition and the belief that the board's authority and responsibility needs to be expanded beyond differential tuition. And we again had quite a discussion on what constitutes differential tuition versus seg fee. And again, it was helpful to have that ongoing discussion concerning those two concepts, which I'm sure we're going to hear both about next month at our meeting. The working group concluded that while the doctoral and comprehensive institutions are much less costly than their peers, the UW colleges are more expensive than theirs and not competitively priced. The group also discussed the issue of whether the university might go about earmarking some of the increased tuition for financial aid, something we're going to be talking about next month as well, and advised that a change in tuition and financial aid policy should be tied to the broad goals of the board in the system. The final meeting of that group is December 4th, which of course is prior to our meeting next month. Al Chris provided a review of the biennial pay plan process for 2007-2009 for faculty, academic staff, and limited appointees, as well as classified staff. That's very timely. That it's an ongoing process. We hope that we're going to get a phone call in the middle of our meeting indicating some further progress in that, but I don't think that call came. And copies of his outlines are in your folders regarding the process, ongoing process on that issue. Sharon Wilhelm presented to the committee preliminary enrollment information for the fall of 2000. We've been interested to see the impact, quite a discussion that we had last year regarding non-resident tuition policy on enrollments. Got considerable attention within this group and outside this group. Non-resident enrollment has grown by 1,200 headcount, while resident enrollments are up by 1,800 since 2006-2007. This is very good news, and we will provide an enrollment report by campus at our December meeting. A couple additional items that Debbie Durkin reported on. We recognize UW of Milwaukee for receiving the Best Practices Award from the Central Association of College and University Business Officers for its program titled Throwing Out the Paper and Keeping the Data. This is a new award program to further the sharing of best practices among colleges and universities. Something you might have also read about, Vice President Durkin noted the new limits on indirect cost reimbursement on Department of Defense grants were included in the final Pentagon spending bill. I think we got an email on that and the effect that might have on our campuses. That was all the meeting we had at Van Hise. We then adjourned to go to the annual Trust Funds Forum. Some of you have gone to in the past. We held our annual Trust Funds Forum, and for the first time we had no one who wanted to speak to us. The forum was noticed and published as usual, so we aren't quite sure why no one other than members of the media came to the meeting.
So they weren't even there? I mean, nobody even came?
Nobody came.
Only the media people with cameras. A lot of pictures taken.
So where was this held?
This was at Granger.
Same place that had been held before?
Same place, same time.
When there used to be 20, 30 people there.
Yeah.
Yes.
We think it's Brent. We're sure.
I didn't know if that was good or bad.
There was that consensus. There was a-
I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go.
So, the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee unanimously approved the following resolution, which I now present as a consent item. On behalf of Business, Finance, and Audit, I move adoption of Resolution 12B1, which is the acceptance of $4.5 million.
So moved.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Just
Jim Loftus?
a quick question, Brent. You said the tuition at colleges, the tuition level at our colleges are higher than their peer group. Is that peer group the same as the peer group for the pay plan for the colleges, or is it a different group?
That way, it specifically talked about UW colleges,
Right.
not the, Debbie, that's from that group. Go ahead.
When we look at the colleges,
We were comparing the college's tuition to the 3 technical college parallel programs. Originally, those 2 were tied at the same tuition level, and so our college's tuition has increased more rapidly than Madison, Milwaukee, Nicolay. And then we also looked at them as compared to community colleges in other states, which really is not a comparable, and we recognize that in our discussion. But when you look at them compared to other states' community colleges, then we're significantly more expensive.
I believe that. But this is not any relationship to the pay plan peer group that we use for the college.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Yeah.
Regent Rosenzweig?
Lest, and I think that Regent Loftus raised a good point here, unless we walk away thinking that this was a peer group comparison, I think that would be inaccurate, and that it was next to the technical colleges as well as other states' community colleges, and it's not exactly a comparison of equal weight. So it doesn't matter now, today, but it matters in the future as we think about it, and we wouldn't want to be misleading or misquoting it.
Well, I guess what I'd say, though, to piggyback on that, Regent Rosenzweig, is these are the closest peers we have. There's nobody else to compare them to. So.
I think that will, I'm a member of that committee, and I think that the way that will be framed in the final report, it will reflect that.
Reflect that conversation.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Procedurally, we have a motion on the floor to approve the trust funds matter. Any other discussion on that motion? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries. Is there any other discussion regarding Brent Smith's report?
I was just going to add to the tuition peer group discussion that the tuition for the transfer degree institutions of the tech college system is set by, guided by state statutes, and it can only be at a certain % higher than tech college tuition. So that's like a set amount that can't be changed. So I just wanted to add that for everyone's knowledge.
Okay, thank you. You're welcome. Anything else, Regent Smith?
That would conclude my report, President Bradley.
Thank you very much. And now making his maiden performance as chair of the Fiscal Planning and Funding Committee,
Maybe a little piano introduction to me.
Regent Bartel.
Thank you, President Bradley.
So far, that's a very, very good job.
A bare quorum of the very small but powerful Physical Planning and Funding Committee, consisting of Regents Falvall, Regent Walsh, and me, met yesterday in our familiar windowless sanctuary on the 15th floor. And the minutes of our October 4 committee meeting were presented and approved. Assistant Vice President David Miller reported that the Building Commission had approved about $10 million in projects at its October meeting. The funding for those projects comes from $1.5 million from the general fund supported borrowing, $6 million from program revenue, and $2.5 million from gift and grant funds. Now, the following resolutions were considered, debated, and approved unanimously by the Physical Planning and Funding Committee and are now presented to the board as consent agenda items. And they are in your materials. Resolution 1.3.B relates to a request by the UW-Madison for approval of a design report and authority to enlarge a parking lot, Lot 36, which is located on Observatory Drive across from the Allen Gardens on the western end of campus. The project will replace parking that is lost to the campus redevelopment project, so there is no net gain in parking. What will happen is that they will add 117 stalls by building 2 additional floors on what is now a 2-floor parking lot. The cost of this project is $2.45 million, all of which will come from program revenue, meaning that parking fees. Resolution 1.3.C reflects a request for a design report approval of Biochemistry 2 project and authority to increase the budget and construct a research tower. The project will also renovate or reconstruct 3 historic buildings on Henry Mall. This is a notable project for a variety of reasons, not just because it results in saving 2 grand old university buildings. The Ag Journalism Building on Henry Mall, constructed in 1906, and the original Biochem building, which was constructed in 1912. And I think it's in that building, isn't it, David, that there are a series of John Stuart Curry murals that will be preserved? So all of that will be saved. In addition, it preserves the character of Henry Mall, which has been a wonderful attraction to this university for over a century. And it also, incidentally, saves one of the few remaining grand elm trees that currently exist in Madison. The reason being, I'm told, that this elm was not near any other elms that suffered Dutch elm disease back in the 60s, 50s and 60s, I guess it was.
It was an educated elm.
It's an educated, well educated by this time. The cost of this project is roughly $116 million, the bulk of which comes from general fund supported borrowing. Resolution 1.3.D is coupled with 1.3.E. These involve authority to expand the UW-Stevens Point campus boundary and the purchase of a parcel of land for parking purposes, and to accept a gift of 2 parcels of land that will be added to the Schmeekley Reserve Nature Conservancy. The acquisition cost of the small parcel being purchased is $98,000 roughly, which is the average of 2 independent appraisals. As we know, that's what we buy property for. That brings us to the next item. The committee took up 2 projects from UW Superior. The first is reflected in Resolution 1.3.F, which provides approval of the design report of the Jim Dan Hill Library renovation an authority to increase the project scope and budget and construct the project, all at a cost of approximately $7.8 million, including more than $3 million in gift funds. And to the knowledge of Mr. Miller, I think this is the first time, am I right, the first time that a library project has, in the system, has been funded with gift funds. So that is notable. And finally, Resolution 1.3.G for UW Superior is authority to increase in scope and budget the construction at Rothwell Student Center at a total project cost of about $25 million. An interesting aspect of this project is that it will be LEED certified. That's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. In other words, a green building. The cost of this project is paid from various sources, including program revenue, cash, a small piece of general fund supported borrowing, a transfer from another UW Superior project, and student seg fees, which, by the way, were approved by referendum on campus. Now, in your materials, you have one more resolution, 1.3.H, requesting authority to construct various maintenance and repair projects at Parkside and Eau Claire campuses from the all-agency funds, and that resolution was withdrawn. All three of those items in that resolution were withdrawn without action by the committee. Some may come back again in the future, but that is not included in the consent resolution. So therefore, we have 6 resolutions that were passed unanimously by the committee comprising the consent resolution, and I now move adoption of resolutions 1.3.B, C, D, E, F, and G.
Second. There's a motion and a second. Is there any request to remove an item from the consent agenda? Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Regent Loftus?
Could you just help with the geography here? Is on the Henry Mall, is the School of Human Ecology project involved in this? Not in this. And then you mentioned the seg fees funding this, and we now have a new requirement from budget language, or campuses have a new requirement from budget language to put on their websites their seg fees. What is that? What is that?
As part of the budget, there was language that was included that information on allocable segregated, all segregated fees for institutions needs to be placed on their website, and that should include information about what organizations and activities are funded by allocable segregated fees. So that is a requirement.
Is that something we would have on this website for parents and students to look at when we were talking about yesterday?
BSA.
I don't know if that's part of the national...
It's not part of the national template, but what is part of the national template is the opportunity to put additional information. There's a click here place where you can go to some place and see fuller information. That will be there. There's also a cost calculator, which will be unique to each institution. So if you were to go on the UW Superior website, you would then click on the cost calculator, which would take you into an exercise looking at what the tuition level is, what the seg fees are, what the room and board costs are, and help you determine what your particular cost would be for attendance there. So it will be incorporated into kind of a second tier of that tool.
What's the deadline for campuses to have this on their website? Not yours, the budget language deadline.
We've just started actually looking into that, but because the information is supposed to appear on student bills, our thought is that it needs to be available by the time that the students are receiving their bills for the spring semester. So there would be information on what website you can go to obtain that information. It's associated with the bills, and so that students will be able to look at their bills and know what they're paying for segregated fees and what those fees are being used for.
Not till September, is that what you said? Next September 1st?
No, for the spring.
Okay.
Any other questions of Regent Bartel?
I have a couple, one more item.
Yes.
To mention. Okay. The committee went into closed session to consider a resolution relating to the naming of a facility at the UW-Madison. When I saw that on the agenda, I thought maybe that was the business school being named University of Wisconsin School of Business. But since that was its name before, I guess it wasn't. It turned out that wasn't the subject matter. The resolution was considered by the committee, and a recommendation will be made, and that resolution will be presented to this board in closed session as permitted by the Wisconsin statutes later this morning. And, Mr. President, this concludes the report of the small but mighty Physical Planning and Funding, and I should say daylight-deprived Physical Planning and Funding Committee.
Thank you, Regent Bartel. You know, before we leave the subject of physical planning, we had previously approved the resolution to name the College of Natural Resources building at UW-Stevens Point, the Daniel O. Traynor College of Natural Resources building. And I, last weekend, was at the dedication ceremony, which was just absolutely a grand celebration of a person who internationally is known. If you're doing anything in natural resources, you know or you know of Dan Traynor. And after the dedication ceremony, I went up to him and I congratulated him and told him how proud he must be of all of his accomplishments. And in his very soft voice, he said, "Well, thank you. And if you buy me a cup of coffee someday, I'll tell you how to run the UW system." Well, I'm gonna put together a couple of quarters and see if I can have lunch with him or something.
Keep it too.
Yeah, and I'll take it. Yes. Next order of business is the report from the Education Committee. Regent Davis.
Mr. President, thank you for saving the best for last. I am pleased to report. The summary from yesterday's meeting of the Education Committee. And after approving the minutes from both our September and October meeting, we only took up one formal action, which I will present at the consent agenda, at the end of my report. And I have to say that the real beauty of yesterday's meeting was that it was heavily weighted towards strategic discussion in a collaborative way with all present, more so than it was approving various items. And I think all who participated not only benefited but felt engaged, and I truly appreciate that. Among other topics was our think tank discussion, but I think I'm going to take the lead of my colleague for business and finance and say that the bulk of what I was going to say I'd like to have included in the minutes from our Education Committee. But I do want to acknowledge that the conversation with our think tank chairperson, Don Christian, and as well as the resource people, Lisa Kornetsky and Rebecca Karoff, really, I think, reflect, and the chancellors who were present, the provosts who were present, and my esteemed colleagues on our committee, really reflected significant and deep, I think, collaboration around the various topics. And I also think that we were pleased to discover the alignment that the think tank, the one we talked with yesterday on student preparedness, is very much aligned with our strategic priority discussions that we've been having over the last few months. To wit, our next meeting in December will include an opportunity to talk to the think tank on collaboration, which is one of the topics that we've identified we're very much interested in. So this is all coming together, I guess is my point. So back to the report. First item up was the UW-Platteville Summary of Accreditation reviewed by the North Central Association Higher Learning Commission and Institutional Report on General Ed. And by the way, we are taking the advice of our esteemed colleague Judy Crane and trying to discover some other way of describing general ed. But in the meantime, it's general ed. The committee heard a presentation by UW-Platteville on its reaccreditation process. The entire UW-Platteville community is to be commended for an outstanding accreditation review. The university was granted an unconditional 10-year accreditation with absolutely no follow-up required. And I'm sure that we are all duly proud of that fact, and I think we should do that. The review process identified certain institutional strengths, including but not limited to the institution's student-centered approach, the commitment and enthusiasm of its faculty and staff, its efforts to put continuous assessment and improvement into practice, the stability of its administrative leadership, its strong system of shared governance, its community partnerships, outreach activities, and close connections to its region, its international efforts, and its plan for financial growth. We heard about Platteville's impressive collaborative engineering programs in the Fox Valley and in Rock County, and also noted were opportunities to improve how students understand the role of general ed in their wider university experience and to strengthen the assessment of general education. So in response, the campus is now moving forward with a comprehensive review of its gen ed, or whatever it's going to be called, program. And all in all, a lot of great things are happening at UW-Platteville, and the committee was pleased to hear about all of them. Next, we move to Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs, Rebecca Martin's report. She helped us make real headway in our efforts to make our meetings more effective in the future. We reached consensus on a set of priorities that we want to focus on in the more limited number of meetings we now have in the 07-08 academic year, and we reached consensus on our desire to use our time well. That is to say, we adopted a concrete plan to conduct our routine business more efficiently, which will allow time for the kind of substantive discussion that the committee really wants to be having, and as evidenced by, as I mentioned before, the think tank discussion. So our priorities. Yesterday's meeting covered several areas on that priorities list, notably charter schools and academic program planning, which I'll get into a little bit later in my report, the latter. Additional priority areas on which we all agreed to focus attention on in the coming year include transfer issues within the UW system, alternative delivery methods which will offer more programs more innovatively to more students, the student experience, teacher education, graduate education, and strategic directions for diversity. These are the issues that rose to the top, although there remain other areas we've identified that, time permitting, we would also like to focus on. Again, our interest is in using our time for substantive regent-level discussion. The compressed schedule really forces the issue, and as a committee, we appreciate the opportunity to make more effective use of our time together. Routine business. We also agreed that we do not want to, you'll love to hear this, micromanage the UW Systems Administration segment. To that end, we agreed with recommendations of Senior Vice President Martin and her staff to handle some of our routine business and recurring agenda items differently than we have done in the past. For example, items like the approval of faculty personnel rule revisions or the approval of the Violence Trust request and proffer, to name a couple of examples, will be placed on a consent agenda, a committee consent agenda. And this is a reflection of the fact that most of the time we don't have questions on these issues, but they require action, and so there's no real need for discussion. From now on, we will put such agenda items on a consent agenda, and if any of us feels the need to discuss them, we can obviously remove them. We reviewed a list of most of the actions and reports we confront on an annual basis and determined that certain of those could be handled differently than in the past. And we'll leave it to system staff to guide us in the months to come, and we'll evaluate our change process as we go along. In other words, being more nimble, fluid, dynamic, and agile. That's an inside joke. Anyway, thanks for sharing. So we then moved on to the annual program planning and review report. And yesterday's fruitful discussion proved that this is a report that we will want to keep on our agenda, but perhaps in a changed form. Associate Vice President Ron Singer presented the 2007 report to us, reminding us of the steps that have traditionally been taken by the campuses, systems administration, and the board in entitling, authorizing, and implementing new programs. He also noted streamlining changes already implemented by the Office of Academic Affairs. This year's report also recommended several changes to the program approval process on our end. Most notable is the recommendation that institutions come forward every 5 years or so with a campus academic plan. This academic plan would include specific information on planned academic program additions, modifications, consolidations, and eliminations over a, let's say, 5-year time horizon, although, that's fluid and agile and dynamic. The plan could replace the need for each new academic program to be brought before the committee for its approval. It would allow the Regents instead to redirect their attention to a more comprehensive understanding of each institution's academic program planning and array, as well as the alignment of that array to each institution's distinct mission and identity. We had a good discussion on the merits of this proposal, and that discussion was had not only by the committee, but again, I want to reiterate, the provosts and the chancellors who were also present, as well as systems administration staff. We concluded that while in some cases we would still want to hear individual academic program presentations, in others, we would be satisfied with incorporating new program proposals into the more comprehensive campus plan. We also anticipate that these campus academic plans would be nimble and dynamic, there we go again, and flexible and adaptable over time in response to changing student demand and state needs, not to mention institutional resources. Finally, we noted that so often programs come to us when they are essentially done deals. The new process would allow some earlier input by Regents into program planning. We asked the Senior Vice President Martin return in December with a list of campus academic programs in the pipeline, both a retrospective look at what we've approved over the past year or so and a prospective look at what is coming. That list will help us evaluate which kinds of academic programs we might want to look at more closely and which ones would be brought before us as part of a larger campus plan. Senior Vice President Martin concluded her report by giving the committee an update on the UW College's task force appointed by President Riley. So with that report then, I have one lone resolution unanimously approved yesterday by the Education Committee that I now present as a consent agenda item for our action. Resolution 11D, authorizing the President of the University of Wisconsin System to recruit for a Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater at a salary within the Board of Regents salary range for University's Senior Executive Salary Group 3.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Anything else, Regent Davis?
Let me conclude by noting that we ended our meeting at 3:55. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to, first of all, thank you, Danae, for your leadership and your commitment in looking at better and newer ways of doing things. I think that's good. I'd also like to mention that regarding the chancellor search at UW-Whitewater, Danae Davis has agreed to chair the Regent Selection Committee, and other regents on that committee are Regent Rosenzweig, Regent Spector, and Regent Thomas. So thanks for your willingness to serve on that selection committee.
Thank you.
Regent Loftus.
Just to Danae we had a very good meeting, and Danae mentioned this, but just for the board's benefit, we had a long discussion on academic programs and how the board could get an earlier look at what was going to be coming at us. Rumbling toward us is a title of doctor for some nurses. And what we wanted, and you recall our discussions of doctor of physical therapy and things like that, we just wanted a system, a process where we had some advance notice of these type of things, because our conclusion was once it gets to the board, the decision is very hard to reverse or say no to. And we did put a process into place. Yeah.
Duly noted. Any other comments or questions of Regent Davis? Okay, thank you very much. Next item is just to ask, are there any additional resolutions for the board to consider? Any communications, petitions, or memorials? Any unfinished business? Nothing on my list. Okay, well, we'll take a 10-minute recess, and then we will reconvene in open session to entertain a motion to go into closed session.